Thank you very much for that introduction, and thanks to all of you for your attendance tonight. I'm really looking forward to our time together. I've been on the campus since early this morning. Went to one of the courses where 3 different teams gave presentations on their projects. They're very impressive. I came into this room after lunch for a leadership course, a seminar that's being taught by Dr. Jay Prague. I really enjoyed that experience, and so I'm looking forward to being with you tonight. When I was asked to do this, I started thinking about leadership and how I might characterize that and sort of capture the time that we were going to spend together tonight. And I decided to talk about leadership as a journey of experiences and opportunities. And it's not just one experience and one opportunity, but a whole series of opportunities that seem to flow in a cycle, if you will. One experience leads to one opportunity, that opportunity leads to another experience, and so forth. And so the question that we start out with was, what makes a leader? Getting organized to be with you today, I spent some time with some friends of mine at the Garrigan Lyman Group in Seattle, a very, very talented marketing and communications firm, considered widely to be the best in the Northwest, if not beyond the Northwest. And I didn't want them to write anything for me. I just wanted them to hear what I thought I was going to do with you this evening and give me some thoughts on how we might present that. So they said, well, Miller, what do you think about when you think about leadership? And I said, well, a lot of things come to mind. They said, well, make a list of those things. And it turned out to be quite a list. Empathy, awareness, focus, honesty, accountability, confidence and dominance, maturity, that would be helpful. Emotional stability, that would be really important, don't you think, for a leader? We'd all want that. Teamwork, enthusiasm, self-assurance, someone who's a risk taker, someone who has high energy. So we went through this long list, and that isn't even the complete list. They said, well, Miller, you're never going to cover all that in the time you have, so let's start trying to pare that down. So I pared it down to about 10 of those traits or qualities or themes that I think about in leadership, and I suspect many of you would have some that you would add to that list that I just gave you. So then the question was, how do we really do something that would be interesting for you to talk about these different traits of leadership? And they said, well, pick the 8 or 10 that you like, and then do you have photographs of your life, Miller, and how those traits came to be in your awareness, or how you came to understand those particular traits of a leader? So I thought about that for a while, and I came up with some ideas, and I said, well, if I pull these things together, can someone in your office help me figure out how to do it? And so we aren't going to have a lot of slides tonight. In fact, we're going to have about 8 or 9 slides, and they're really photographs that will help us talk about various qualities of leadership from my perspective. The first is awareness. How many people here are in leadership somewhere? How many of you you're leading a team, you're an executive at a company, you're a supervisor at a company? Many hands go up, if not almost all of them. And the question that I have about awareness of leadership is, why me? Why did people ask you to take that leadership role? And when did that happen? And what did you think about it when it did happen? Did you change the way you were interacting with people because now you were the leader? And so this whole sense of awareness becomes important, because once you move into that leadership position, people are going to start watching you. And so these photographs capture that point of time in my life. The picture on the left is my official Eagle Scout photograph. Any Boy Scouts in the crowd here? Okay, a couple. This is my official Eagle Scout photograph. I was 15 and a half when that picture was taken. Most young men got their Eagle Scout rank, the top rank in scouting, at about 17, between 17 and 18. But I was in a bit of a hurry because I was really enjoying what I was learning about how to be a leader. I didn't realize that this would be so important to me. In fact, on my resume today, it says Eagle Scout, age 15. And that's on my official business resume, because that's where I really got the first awareness of what it meant to be a leader. And that experience led to so many opportunities, one of which is captured in the upper right photo. Does anyone recognize the person who is shaking my hand there? Who is that? President Lyndon Johnson. I'm standing in the Oval Office with him, making a report to him about scouting in the United States. Does anyone recognize the person standing behind us? That's Prime Minister Wilson from the United Kingdom. He happened to be in town, and learning that this was going to happen that day and knowing that scouting actually started in England, he said, well, I need to be part of this. So he showed up to smile in everybody's photographs. So he was in every photograph just like he's in my photograph. So this experience led to a whole series of opportunities, but that by the time I was 17, I was standing with the president talking about my experiences in scouting. And I knew from that first moment that there was going to be something different there because I was moving through all these leadership positions, and I knew that people were watching the way I was handling that and the way I was carrying myself. So this whole sense of awareness becomes very important, and you're aware of your leadership where you are. You lead where you are, and you do the best job you can at that point. Confidence is another trait that made it on the short list when I was meeting with Garrigan Lyman. And this whole idea of confidence is that you really need to do something important when things aren't going well. If you're a leader, and almost all the hands went up in this room, if you're a leader and things aren't going well, people are expecting you to figure out what to do. So you need to be confident. What would we think if the leader says, gosh, this is scaring me to death, and just left you on your own? You need a confident leader. It's a quality that is very important. So how does that really become contagious? It becomes contagious in an organization when the leader says, I know this is hard, I know we're having problems, I know we're not meeting our targets, but believe me, if we work together, we're going to get there. This sort of confidence is really contagious and noticeable in leaders. So think about that in your own leadership role and in those who are leading you in various contexts. So these photographs talk about a time when it was really important to have confidence. Not many of you were around in the 1960s. I was, of course. But there was a lot of unrest in our country in the 1960s. In the South, people were being beaten, homes were being burned. In colleges, there were riots taking place. And Seattle, where I was growing up, was not immune to that. And things were really getting very, very touchy on high school campuses. I happened to be president of my senior class that year. And a good friend of mine, Rod Casaguma, who's in the lower right photograph, he's the young man who's standing. He was our ASB president of the Associated Student Body, and I was president of the senior class. And the principal and vice principal of our school brought us in and said, listen, Bobby, I wasn't using my middle name then, listen, Bobby and Rod, we need to figure out what to do so that the things that are happening in other schools do not make it all the way down the valley to Rainier Beach High School. And he said, and we want you two to figure out how to do that. And so we had to bring together all these different student leaders and talk about what do we need to do on our campus so that we don't get caught up in all the unrest taking place in Seattle. And they didn't need myself and Rod to say, we don't know what to do, we're scared. We were scared, but we needed to be very confident in our leadership. And many times since then, in a business context, I've known that things are really scary for people. And I've led lots of different groups, very large business groups and other groups. And I've seen this happen so many times, and that's when, as a leader, I need to be really confident. Say, I know this is scary, but I know we're going to get through this. So confidence is something that we need to see as a trait in leadership. Accountability is also important. We really want leaders who will take responsibility for what they're doing and take responsibility for those who work with them or for them. It's very unsettling to be in a situation where no one seems to care about their accountability. They don't have a sense of purpose, and they don't understand that people are relying on them to get things done. And I have found myself in those situations at different times, and this is a good example that I'm going to share with you, where it's really important to say, I'm taking responsibility for this. I'm going to get it done. This picture is of Trinity Episcopal Church, the oldest Episcopal congregation in Seattle, the oldest church in Western Washington. Very, very old building, and as you can expect, there are a lot of problems in a building like that. It used to be just a little bit out of downtown Seattle, and now, of course, the city has grown around it, so it's a very, very iconic downtown urban church on the historic landmark roster, of course. And as a registered building like that, there are a lot of issues about what you can do in the building. And sure enough, as you can imagine, it started falling apart. This was many years ago. And I found myself being asked to put together a team of members in the congregation to figure out how to raise the money and then how to refurbish this church. And it was a lot of work. And the issues that started to arise were around emotion for the most part. Well, we can't change the paint because we've always had that paint color. And we can't do this over here on the altar because we have people's ashes in the altars in Miller, so we can't change anything on the altar. And we can't do anything in the courtyard because we have people buried in the courtyard. This sort of thing went on and on in this whole situation. Is this on or off? It's kind of flipping back and forth, isn't it? Sorry about that. And so the key thing that I needed to do was help people understand that I was going to take responsibility for this project, and I would be held accountable for getting it done properly. And we did have some problems. The paint contractor used the wrong paint on a 100-foot-high wall. And I took responsibility for that and said, I'm sorry that happened. I didn't blame the painter. I said, I'm sorry that happened. We're going to bring the scaffolding back, because we had scaffolding up to the roof of the building, the ceiling, and we're going to redo that and make it properly so. And we did that. And other things happened along the way, and it was really important. And people came up to me later saying, gosh, Miller, we didn't realize that you would really take responsibility for getting this done. I said, well, that's what you asked me to do. That's what a leader should do. Now, in the business context, it's a little different. I've worked in more than one company where no one takes responsibility for what they're doing. And it's very unsettling. And I don't know if any of you have had that experience, but I've had that experience more than once, and it wasn't good. My personal experience, however, was kind of interesting. I was working with a big company, and I'd been asked to take over this project team because they were having a little bit of trouble. And somebody who was working for me said, well, Miller, why don't you let me go over there and help straighten that out? And I wasn't quite sure he was ready to do that, but he really wanted the opportunity, and opportunities are really important. So I said, okay, you go take over that team, and he did. And, of course, it didn't get better. In fact, it got worse. So now I had two problems. I had a project team that wasn't performing well, and I had a leader who wasn't performing well. Along the way, we had to present what we were doing to my boss. So we flew down to his office, and we did that. And he wasn't happy, of course, because the project was still over budget and behind schedule. And so after we did the presentation, I sat down with him, and he said, Miller, this isn't working very well. What are you going to do about this? And I said, George, first I want you to know that I'm going to take responsibility for anything that happens here. And I'm going to take responsibility for changing out the leadership team. That doesn't mean I'm going to fire the person who I put in that job. I had given him an opportunity. He wasn't comfortable there. We put him back in a position where he was comfortable, and he went on to thrive throughout his career. But I said, I'm also going to make sure that we get this project straightened out. And when we come back to you, if it's not straightened out, I'll take responsibility for that. So we made those changes. I spent a little bit of time with the team myself, trying to help them understand that they shouldn't be panicking. Most people know when they're not performing. I said, I know that you know you're not performing, so let's work on a solution to the problem, which we did. And a few months later, we went back, briefed my boss again, and he said, well, looks like you're back on track. Everything's great. Now, I'm not sure what would have happened if we hadn't improved. Fortunately, I didn't have to find out, but I was ready to walk if that was necessary, because it was important that people understand that I was going to take responsibility, not just for what I was doing, but for all the people who reported to me. So accountability is something we really need to see in leaders. Enthusiasm is also important, particularly in unexpected leadership situations in an unanticipated environment. Unexpected leadership situation in an unanticipated environment. You'll see, of course, these are Boeing aircraft. This is a 787 factory up in Seattle. I went to Boeing sort of in the middle of my career, never having thought I would work for the Boeing company, but they really wanted me to come to Boeing. And when I got there, I had no job description, and they didn't know who I would report to, but they wanted Miller at Boeing. So I thought, okay, let's go do this. And so they started asking me to do different things that they were thinking about, because I was sort of an outsider and could bring a different perspective. The first thing we did was create a technology planning group that looked at all the different technology requirements of the business units of Boeing, commercial airplanes and space and defense and the classified programs and so forth. I was working in the Phantom Works business unit, which is the advanced R&D business unit. I eventually reported to that president and also reported to the CTO of Boeing. And they started asking me to do things that they knew needed to be done, and I was more than willing to take on the responsibility. Once we figured out the technology requirements of Boeing, then the question was, how do we meet all those expectations? Because all the requirements at Boeing were far exceeded the amount of money we had to pay. This is what the technology teams needed. This is how much Boeing could pay. So we needed to fill the gap somehow. And so I started creating all these different strategies to fill the gap. We created a venture capital strategy, which we're replicating today, as Maria said. It was a very successful strategy to get lots of visibility globally. I rearranged how we did academic research. I created a team that would set up technical partnerships around the world. We called them either traditional or non-traditional. The traditional ones all made sense. They were with other big companies and Sandia Laboratory and Los Alamos and all the different labs. We went out of the country and created those same technical partnerships with laboratories in Australia, Malaysia, China, the Ukraine, Moscow, South Africa, India. We had a great opportunity doing this. Then I started creating technical partnerships with non-traditional companies. Surfboard companies, Formula One racing teams, all the different companies where I knew we could find technology for Boeing. And it was really quite successful. But the thing that was most important, and the reason this is about enthusiasm, is that none of these things had been done before at Boeing. And the corporate culture said, we can't do this. The corporate culture would kill anything that was new and different from outside. And so I had to continue to talk to the teams about the fact that I know we're kind of swimming upstream. I know we're trying to push a rope up the hill. I know we're doing things against the odds, but this is important work. And so they needed lots of active leadership. They needed lots of expressive leadership. They needed lots of energetic and optimistic leadership because this had never been done before. And we were really quite successful at it. And we did that for a number of years. And I remember people saying, gosh, Miller, this isn't the way we do things at Boeing. And I would say, well, yes, but this is the way we should do things at Boeing. Or they'd say, we haven't done it this way before. I'd say, well, that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it this way now. But you have to remember that these engineering folks, and for the most part, everybody was an engineer. I'm a lawyer. I'm not an engineer, so people always thought I was an engineer, but I'm not. Because I was running all this engineering strategy. But it wasn't my job to do the work. It was my job to give them the resources to do what they were doing well. And it was really important to remember that. So enthusiasm was really, really important. A down-in-the-mouth leader is not very encouraging. So it takes a lot of enthusiasm, particularly when you're in sort of unexpected leadership situations in uncertain environments. Decisiveness is another theme that really came to the surface for me when I talked about this with the Garrigan Lyman folks. We need leaders that make tough decisions and have strong, steady hands. We look for the best outcomes always. And so decisiveness becomes really important, particularly when you're dealing with troubling situations. And this example is one of those. This photograph is the Rainier Club. It's a 126-year-old club at this point, the oldest private business club in Seattle. Until 1976, many of us in this room could not have been a member of this club. All the women, all the people of color, anyone who might be Jewish. That was traditional for these sort of clubs. Back in 1966, I think it was, I was asked to make a presentation to a business group, and the meeting happened to be at the Rainier Club. I thought, oh, okay, fine. So I drove downtown to the Rainier Club and pulled into the parking lot and was ushered down the alley and in the back door to go in and speak to this business group. Well, I was a little shocked by that, as you can appreciate. And things started to change. And last year, I was the president of the Rainier Club. And for many years, it had been anticipated that a large construction project would take place next to the clubhouse that you see here. It's right in the middle of downtown Seattle, and the city has grown up around it. We have a full half block, and it's a historic building, of course. Right behind us is a historic church, and then there's this quarter block area where a developer wanted to put up a high-rise building because all these high-rise buildings are going up all over downtown Seattle. So for 6 or 7 or 8 years, every president of the Rainier Club knew that this developer was trying to put together his financing and trying to get all the permitting done in order to construct this building. And lo and behold, he wanted to break ground during my term as president. So I had to negotiate all these final contracts with him and with the city of Seattle and all these different things. And that's when decisiveness became really important, because now all of a sudden it was really going to happen. And members of the club started to panic. Oh, how can we do this? We aren't going to have a parking lot for 18 months. I said, don't worry, we're going to rent a garage down the street while we're rearranging our parking lot. And by the time we get back, we're going to have an 8-story garage, not a one-level parking lot that he's paying for, by the way. That's what we negotiated with him. We're going to have all this money that we can use to do other things around the club because we needed to do some refurbishing and some major work in the club. And I had to do what we called fireside chats, these fireside chats over and over and over again with leaders. And they needed to see their president as being really steady and really prepared to take them through this particular challenge. And so at the end of the day, I got things where I wanted it to be. We negotiated the final documents, and we got a $16 million package from the developer for the Rainier Club. $11 million garage that we now own and $5 million in cash to sort of make us feel good about ourselves. And everybody was happy then. But since that time, many people have come up and said, Miller, we really needed that decisive, steady leadership, because this is the biggest thing that had happened at the Rainier Club in 85 years. And people were worried about it and fearful. And now, as you see in the photograph, I'm handing the gavel to the president, who's president this year. Our garage comes back on June 1, and everything seems to have moved well. We're using some of that $5 million to do some very important things inside the club, so that by the time the garage opens up in June, all this interior work will have been done. And that's where I think decisive leadership was really important. Teamwork is something everybody knows about. The concept of teamwork is not new. You see it on the campuses here at Claremont. You see it in businesses, nonprofits, the military for sure. Everywhere you go, you hear people talking about teamwork. But it's important when you think about teamwork to remember that at some point in time, you're a team member, and other time, you're a team leader, and that can sort of ebb and flow as you go through your life. And I have found that the very best team members are good team leaders because they understand how hard it is to be a team leader. So they become really good team members. And so it's really important to remember that you're leading where you are, no matter what that might be. And the whole idea is to take that leadership experience as an opportunity if you want to move into a different leadership role. And that's where every experience becomes an opportunity which you can then recycle into a new experience. These pictures capture some things that I remembered about teamwork. Dick's Drive-In is an iconic drive-in chain in Seattle. Richard Spady, Dick Spady started. He just passed away a few months ago, but his children have continued to run Dick's Drive-In, and that was my first real job. I was 15 and a half. I got my little work permit from the city of Seattle, and I went to work at Dick's. And you see that 19 up there? That was the price of a hamburger. Cheeseburgers were 24, French fries were 11, and a Coke was 10 cents. So this was a while ago. And it was really a neat place, and you can kind of see that this was these are old photographs, and I'm glad that the people found old photographs of Dick's Drive-In. And I learned so much about teamwork because they had this manual that told you how to do everything at every station in the restaurant. And you would learn one station, then you would go to the next, you'd learn that station, you'd go to the next. And as you went around, they were watching, and if people got to the point that they were really pretty good at making French fries, but they weren't really that good at cooking hamburgers, then they would shift them over to French fries because they knew that that's where they can make the best contribution to the team. They didn't belittle them. They didn't say that they weren't competent. They just figured out where they did the best work, and that's where they put them. So it's important as a leader when you're working with a team to figure out what it is that people do well and then help them figure out how to do more of that. It's a great quote. Help people find out what they do well and help them do more of it. Pretty simple concept. Another concept is a quote I found, all work is honorable work. It's the level of responsibility that is different. So as you look at teams, you think about that. The picture in the upper right, these young folks are folding up an American flag, and as you can expect, there's a process that has to be followed to do that. And certain things happen at certain times, and there's a leader there who is probably helping them figure out who needs to fold that flag next to get it into that nice triangle that you see when people are presented an American flag. And there are certain times in that process that are more important than others. And usually the leader has been watching this team over a period of time and figures out who to put in certain positions on that flag to make sure that everything comes out right. He's not saying, or she's not saying, because there are a lot of young women in scouting today, they're not saying that someone isn't doing it well. They're just trying to figure out what do they do best, and let's help them do that. The bottom picture on the left is a little bit different. Now you've got all these little teams with sort of like sub-teams. Everybody getting in a canoe. You have two people. Somebody has to say to the other, can you help me figure out how to get in this canoe? And then they have to get out on the water without tipping the thing over. And now they become part of a larger team. And somebody else is helping them figure out where we're going to go next. So teamwork is something that I find particularly interesting because you can see all sorts of dynamics in a team. People who are quiet, people who are sort of overly exuberant. You know, you can see all these different things in a team, and as a leader, it's your job to figure out how to manage all that and really get the best out of all these different people. So teamwork is really, really important. One thing I think about a lot with a leader is the foundation that underpins the leader. Typically, it might be a family member, or it could be children, or it could be a person you have close relationships with. But I think every strong leader typically has, and successful leader, typically has some sort of foundation that underpins that. And so these are photographs of this foundation for me. The bottom left is my wife, Dr. Cheryl Roberts, and our dog, Logan. We don't have children together. I brought two daughters to the marriage as a single parent 20 years ago, but we don't have children together. And Cheryl and I have really watched each other go through our leadership transitions and our leadership journey. Cheryl was very supportive when we were first married. I was traveling a lot. I was out of the country a lot. And she would go with me on certain trips as her schedule would allow. She's in education. At that time, she was a dean or an associate dean. She was kind of moving through the ranks at the University of Washington and also in community colleges. And she would go with me because it was really important for me to have her with me at certain times in certain meetings. And of course, she was smart. She let me go to certain cities by myself, and I won't name them because some of you might be from them. But she could always figure out a way to go to Paris or London or Australia. But she let me go to some other cities by myself. But she was very supportive as the spouse of this leader at the Boeing Company. Now, this person on the upper right is her father, Leroy Roberts, Jr. And by the time Cheryl and I were married, I had lost both my parents. I lost my mother in high school. And some people ask, when did you start using the name Miller? It was when I went to college. And I can tell you more about that if you want later. But I lost my mother in high school, pretty traumatic as you can expect. Lost my father shortly after college. I was married, then I was a single parent with these two girls, and things were moving along. And when Cheryl and I came together and got married, my two daughters stood up with me at the wedding, and along with my relatives. And Cheryl's parents stood up with her. Her mother, Ann Johnson Roberts, was from Haiti. She was really a neat lady, really bright, graduated college at age 17. She was amazing, but she couldn't get a real job, of course, in the South back in those days. She had immigrated to South Carolina. Some of you might know the Tuskegee Airmen. My father-in-law was in the first class of the Tuskegee Airmen, the 99th Pursuit Squadron. He stayed in the Army Air Corps, which became the Air Force, retired as a lieutenant colonel in McCord Air Force Base in Tacoma. That was his dress uniform, and he was buried in that uniform. He could still wear it. He was a very proud man. He was great to me. They insisted that I call him Mom and Dad, and they became my new foundation along with my daughters. The other pictures there are of my kids. The upper left is my oldest daughter, Jennifer, and her family. The picture on the right is my younger daughter, Megan, and her family. As I mentioned, when Cheryl and I came together, they were quite a bit younger, of course. And Jennifer's now 45, Megan's 39, and we have 5 grandchildren. Along the way, Cheryl found herself being asked to go to Oregon when she finally realized that it was okay for us, because of our situation, for her to go out of state. She had gone as far as she could go in her career in community colleges in the Seattle area. She said, if I want to get a job as a vice president for instruction, which is the next job, I'll need to go out of state. And I said, that'd be fine. We could make that work. So she got a job in Eugene, Oregon as the number 2 executive, the vice president for instruction at a big community college. She was there for 3 years or so, and we just got a house down there and kind of did the normal sort of thing. She came back to Seattle, and then a few years later, she was asked to take on her first presidency at a large community college, 38,000 student community college in Salem, Oregon. And Chemeketa Community College. Elise and I were talking about that because Elise went to Willamette, so she knows Chemeketa. And that's when I watched her father tell her about what it was going to be like to be a leader of a college of that size, and a faculty of that size, and a staff of that size, which was going to be her first presidency. And she was a little nervous about it. And she asked me would I be able to come from Seattle to be there and so forth. I said, I'll be there whenever you want me to be there. And she used to laugh and say, I was a great college president's husband. I knew how to work the room. I knew how to ask for money, and I never embarrassed her in public. So I showed up at lots of events with Cheryl, and it was really a lot of fun. She had a great experience there. She was there 7 years. They built about $140 million worth of new buildings and campuses and all kinds of stuff. And she's now back in Seattle as the president of Shoreline Community College north of Seattle. So this whole foundation thing is important, not necessarily children or parents or spouses, just people who give a strong sort of underpinning to the leader. Because as those of you who put up your hand saying you're in leadership, it gets lonely sometimes, doesn't it? And who do you go talk to? Cheryl found that out in spades, if you will, in Salem. Chemeketa Community College was the second largest employer in the city of Salem. The largest employer was state government. And then everybody else seemed to work for her campus. So she really couldn't have any strong friendships and relationships in Oregon. So she relied on me, she relied on my girls, she relied on her parents until they passed away, and she relied on some of her friends in Seattle. But she never really found herself with strong relationships right in Salem because it was a small town and everybody knew everybody, and almost everybody worked on her campus somehow. Inspiration is the last theme that I thought would be important to talk about. It's really important to be inspired by people and inspire others. So inspiration goes in both directions. Really, it's the vision of the future, and it should be given very freely and very often to others. These photographs at Seattle University, where I went to undergraduate school, and Cheryl also went to Seattle University, but as she likes to point out, several years after me. But she went to Seattle U. She went back east to the Ohio State University to get her master's and came back and got her doctorate at Seattle U. She's still the youngest person to get a doctorate in education at Seattle University. I went to Seattle U as undergrad and then went to law school at the University of Puget Sound. Some years later, 22, 23 years later, Seattle University actually purchased the law school that I had gone to, which is pretty amazing. And they moved it to Seattle, and it's now the Seattle University School of Law. So they like to tell me that I have 2 degrees from Seattle U, particularly when they send fundraising letters to me. But I always counter and say, I know I have a 1.5 degrees from Seattle U, so that's how I handle it. But Seattle University was very important to me. The education as a non-Catholic, particularly the Jesuit education, was really, really very amazing to me. I loved it. And as a result, when they asked me years later to come back to Seattle U as a member of the Board of Regents, I said I'd be happy to do that. I had to give back to that institution. They had inspired me to do lots of really interesting things, and I needed to come back and help them continue to do that. And then also mentoring in the law school and in the business school. So I encourage all you students to think about what you're getting here on this campus. I'm sure it's inspiring you. And some years from now, you need to be back on this campus, helping other students realize how valuable this experience has been. So inspiration, both received and given, is very important for leadership. So we've talked about 8 different concepts tonight. So what's the summary? We need to lead where we are, no matter what it is. We need to lead by example because people are watching. We need to learn from our experiences and seize the opportunities that are given to us and share your vision and your inspiration. And perhaps most importantly, you need to help others on their journey as well to leadership. So I need to thank a few people before we go to the Q&A. The first is Elise, who was really helpful early on, and then she became even more helpful near the end when she was encouraging me to make sure I was ready to be here. So thank you, Elise. She did a good job of shepherding me along. Dr. Jay Pragg, he told me to call him Jay, so I called him Dr. Jay. He also reached out to me because he knew I would be visiting with his class earlier today for an hour and a half. We had a great conversation about leadership and my thoughts about it. He was asking if I had a script. I said, no, there's no script. He said, oh, okay. But he was confident it would be all right. He came to visit with me a little bit today, and we followed up on some of our conversation earlier. He's really great. You're very fortunate, those of you who are in his class. And then, of course, Dr. Maria, great story about how we met and your patience in helping me find a time that I could actually be here. So I want to thank you for that. So thanks to all of them. Join me in thanking them.
Go for it.
Yes, sir.
Jordan.
Okay, that was a long question. Did most of you hear the question, or should I try to repeat that? Okay. Ethical and moral, how does the ethical and moral compass help me in situations where it's sort of untraditional or non-traditional to be a black person in that environment? Is that where you're going? Okay. Clearly, I learned a lot very early on from my parents, who were very, very active in our church, the church that you saw tonight. And that experience helped me quite a bit to figure out that I was really in control of my environment. I didn't need to be influenced by others. And I have found myself, for the most part, by myself everywhere I've been. When I was in scouting, black kids in scouting, you got to be kidding. Not to mention the Eagle Scout and going to the White House. I mean, that was very unusual. When I was teaching skiing as a professional ski instructor, people thought, what? Black folks don't ski and you're running a ski school? When I went to college, I was managing a swimming pool. Everybody thought we couldn't float, and I was managing a swimming pool for the city of Seattle. And then, law firms and businesses and Boeing and everywhere. Boeing had 230 corporate officers, 10 black corporate officers in a business of 139,000 people. So I've always kind of been by myself. And so how has my moral compass helped me kind of navigate all that? It's been pretty straightforward for me. I know what's right and what's wrong, and I always do what's right if I can, and usually I can. And I don't let the environment influence me. Earlier today, one of Dr. J's students asked me a similar question, and I said, I have never been anywhere I thought I didn't belong. Nobody's going to tell me I can't do that. I'm as qualified to do it or more qualified than they are. Why would they try to tell me I can't be there? So I sort of ignored that kind of thing. And as a result, I haven't had a lot of challenges there. Have I had tough experiences, Jordan? Jordan, is that correct? Jordan? I've had tough experiences. Yeah, I've been called names. I've had bad things happen. But typically, I'm still able to overcome that. A good example is early in law practice, before Facebook and all that, you really didn't know who you were interacting with. You're doing things on the phone, and pretty soon you'd meet somebody. And more than once, actually on a pretty regular basis, I'd be dealing with opposing counsel or attorneys representing another company if we were doing an M&A deal or something, and we'd be doing phone calls and conference calls and all this kind of stuff. And then we'd have our first face-to-face meeting, and I'd show up and they'd say, "Oh, you're Miller Adams?" And I'd say, "Well, is that okay with you?" I mean, they were shocked. And then they'd go on to say something like, "Well, you don't sound black to me." Well, what the hell does that mean? So I have never allowed people to kind of tell me where it is I need to be. It has been rough at times along the way, but I've always been able to overcome that. Good question, though, Jordan. Other questions? Yes, sir.
So, follow up to in your preamble, said that you're going to kind of clue in whether leaders are made or leaders made or born?
They're not born. And leaders are really evolved, I believe. I mean, how many of us could say that we were born a leader? I don't know about that. I think you need to, one person. I think that people who excel in leadership, or people who show lots of abilities in leadership at a young age, are still doing that because they've been given an opportunity to do that. They've been given an experience where they can sort of show that they have those leadership skills. And that was the awareness slide. I mean, I was pretty young when all that stuff was happening, and unexpected, actually, that those kind of things would be happening. So it wasn't that, Miller or anybody else was born a leader. I was just fortunate enough to have some experiences and opportunities at a pretty early age that helped me understand that I could actually do that. And people were saying, "You can do this." Was that, you were just putting your hand up or asking a question? Okay. Yes, sir.
What does Triad Partners do anyway?
Triad Capital Partners is a private equity fund based in Seattle. It's been around a long time. It's an affiliate of Triad Development, which is a very old-style real estate development firm. They have been making lots of investments along the way. I had invested with some of their principals on various early-stage companies. And at a point in time when they realized they had far too much money invested there, they asked me if I would join them to run that private equity piece. And I said I would do that, but we also need to raise our own fund, Triad Venture Partners, which is essentially a recreation of the venture capital strategy that I did at Boeing when I was the president of Boeing Phantom Works Investments, Inc. And many of the team members have also retired from Boeing, like myself, and we've all come back together to create this recreation, if you will, of the Boeing private equity fund.
So that's private equity, non-public?
Yes, non-public, yeah. Yes, sir.
Had a career stretching back like 60 years in the development of and exploitation of technology
Mm-hmm.
of all sorts. And I'm wondering if you have much insight into, I'm thinking of famous examples when I was growing up. Kodak was renamed in photography and everything, and yet they seem to have fallen behind when digital photography came up. And right now there's a lot of technology going on in the computer business and cell phones and everything.
Mm-hmm.
There doesn't a day go by in a newspaper where you hear some of the leaders are faltering and so forth. Do you have any feel for what the key ingredient for success in the world of technology today, which is constantly changing?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time with the management teams of the companies that we're involved with, helping them with that very question. And my message to them is that you need to keep your eyes open. You need to be reading lots of journals to see what's going on around the world. You need to be willing to pivot very quickly when your business model is no longer viable. You need to figure out, what do we do next? Good example, we have a company that they're back on the East Coast, and they have, I can't go into too much detail, but they have a technology that enhances the ability of long-haul trucks, over the road, big semis, to enhance their efficiency. And that was good when they were spending $4 a gallon for diesel fuel. Now they're spending $2 a gallon for diesel fuel. And the CEO said, "Well, Miller, we're not reaching our sales goals anymore." I said, "I think you need to look for the adjacent market, and you need to pivot over there." And so they've now gone to the adjacent market of generator sets, they call them gen sets, fixed generators that are huge and really inefficient. And also, the next thing they did after that was move into the maritime the maritime area, tugboats and towboats on the Mississippi and the other rivers in the Midwest are very inefficient, and yet they don't have the same constraints that they have for automobiles, and they aren't paying the low price for fuel. So they really need that. So you have to be really very, very aware of what's going on in your market and adjacent markets, and then figure out where you need to pivot. One thing that we encourage people to do is go to lots of these conferences and in their area of expertise, and just listen to the panelists, and then go up to the chair of the panel and say to the chair of the panel, we'd like to talk to you about this area that you're discussing on the panel. Who do you think would be the very best person in the world for us to talk to about that space? And of course, what's the panelist going to say? Well, me. He said, if this conference asked me to get the very best people in the world on this panel, then I must be really knowledgeable. And so we call these people thought leaders. And we bring these thought leaders in to talk to us about what it is that they see as the next generation of that particular technology. And most of those kind of folks are more than happy to do that. So my short answer is keep your eyes open, stay in all the journals and technical data, and also be prepared to be really nimble and pivot when you need to.
Well, the thing I've often heard is the successes that occur when someone imagine just what business are they in?
Mm-hmm.
Change their business model or whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like the airline business, are the airlines in the airline business? No, they're in the transportation business. So they need to know what business are they in. One more question, perhaps? Yes. Mm-hmm. How do I deal with that? You have to fess up right away. It's the phrase I use is that you can't manage a secret. Think about that. You can't manage a secret, so you can't keep it secret. And it's like fish on the kitchen counter at home. It doesn't get better over time if you leave it out on the kitchen counter. So you have to fess up immediately and just explain what's going on. I'll give you an example of that. It goes back to that whole Rainier Club example. I spent that year when I was showing all this decisiveness, helping people understand we could do this, telling them that we were going to have a garage in June of 2016. And that was based on information that I had about how the construction was going to flow. They were going to dig this huge hole, and then they were going to build every floor of this garage up to the top, and then we were going to have the top and all the different levels below. What I found out later was that the garage that we're going to own is interconnected to the garage of the tower next to us. And, the ramps are going to go back and forth. And because they're not going to finish their tower by June of 2016, we can't get what's called a certificate of occupancy for our full level of garage. So the new president, in one of his fireside chats, said we're going to have the first level outer court back, which is what we've had for 50 years or more, in June. And somebody said, well, I thought we were going to have a full garage back. And before he could answer, I said, Bryce, can I answer that question? And I got up and I said, you're right. I told you several times last year that we were going to have full 6 levels of garage. But guess what? I was wrong. And this is what happened. And when I explained what happened, I said, I'm really sorry, but we're going to have 1 level of parking, which we've had for 50 years. We're not going to have the full garage. And I'm really sorry about that. And they said, oh, okay. But, those things happen. And you just have to kind of say, I was wrong. The other thing I used to do with people at Boeing particularly is say that we don't necessarily need a 100% solution. Boeing engineers were some of the smartest people I've ever worked with. And they always wanted a 100% solution. I said, 80% is probably okay. We've got to move forward. And sometimes when we had an 80% solution, guess what? It didn't work. And I said, well, I have these friends who are brain surgeons, and they used to talk about what happened when they were interns and residents doing brain surgery, and if something went wrong, somebody died. And so I say, we're not doing brain surgery. We're doing business. So if we get an 80% solution and it doesn't work, we'll double back and we'll figure out what to do about it. And that was this whole thing of leading them with some encouragement and optimism that, if something doesn't work, we'll fix it. Now, I used to always say to them, but remember, we don't need a lot of near-death experiences, which is to say we don't need to make the same mistake over and over again. But, I've been wrong many times. I've made many mistakes. And typically they aren't fatal, but they can be embarrassing. And the best thing to do is say, hey, I made a mistake. And this is what I think we need to do to fix it. And if you're leading somebody, which is your real question, you're leading a team and you end up at a dead end. They say, well, Miller, you told us to take this road and there's a dead end. You know, I was wrong. I'm really sorry. Let's turn around, go back to that why in the road and figure out which way we should have gone. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.